The story of the Second Punic War begins like the slow rising of a storm on the horizon, when no one realizes at first how powerful it will become, and only later understands that it will reshape the fate of empires. Imagine a Mediterranean world where two powers watched each other with growing suspicion, each convinced that the other threatened its survival, and where ambition, revenge, and pride became as important as armies and weapons. Rome and Carthage had already fought once, and although Rome emerged victorious from the First Punic War, the peace never truly settled in the hearts of either side. Rome had taken Corsica and Sardinia, forced heavy payments, and constantly reminded Carthage of its defeat, while Carthaginian leaders believed this humiliation was temporary and that the day would come when they could challenge Roman dominance again. In this tense environment, children were raised not only with memories of war but with promises of future retribution, and among those children was Hannibal, who would grow into one of the greatest military minds in history. Under Hamilcar Barca, Carthage rebuilt its strength far from Roman interference, turning to Spain where new wealth, land, and recruits could be gathered. This expansion into Iberia was not simply exploration, it was preparation. Every mine opened, every fort constructed, every alliance made with local tribes was part of a long strategic vision to return Carthage to greatness and eventually stand again against Rome. Roman senators watched this growth with alarm, realizing that although the peace treaty had been signed, the rivalry had never ended. Each side publicly spoke about treaties and boundaries, but beneath formal words there was mistrust, fear, and quiet calculation. When Hannibal captured Saguntum, a city Rome considered under its protection, the political mask finally fell away. Rome demanded his withdrawal, expecting Carthage to retreat in the face of its demand, yet Carthage refused, proud and defiant, unwilling to sacrifice its rising commander. That single refusal lit the flame of war. Rome declared war, confident in its fleets and legions, believing power at sea would confine Carthaginian action. But Hannibal thought differently. He understood that to surprise Rome, he needed to strike at the heartland in a way no enemy ever had, and so he made the audacious decision to march overland with his army through Spain, Gaul, and the towering Alps. This was not only a military maneuver but a demonstration of will stronger than mountains and weather. The journey itself became a trial of endurance that tested soldiers, animals, and leadership under brutal snow, landslides, hostile tribes, and freezing nights where many wondered whether they would survive long enough to face Rome at all. Men died on narrow paths, supplies were lost, and yet Hannibal pushed forward, motivating his troops with a vision of glory and the promise that once they crossed these barriers, the rich plains of Italy would open before them. When he finally descended into the Po River Valley with a battered but determined force of infantry and cavalry, Rome found itself staring at an enemy that had already overcome the impossible just to arrive. This alone created an atmosphere of shock and suspense across the Republic. How could an army cross the Alps and now stand ready to fight on Italian soil? Citizens felt fear, generals felt both duty and anxiety, and the Senate understood that this was no ordinary invasion. It was the beginning of a struggle not only for land, but for supremacy in the Western Mediterranean. Rome mobilized its legions, confident in discipline and numbers, but soon learned that Hannibal's tactics, speed, and psychological insight made him unlike any commander they had faced before. What had begun as a dispute over Saguntum had now evolved into a continental confrontation shaped by political resentment, youthful ambition, and the clash of two civilizations that could not coexist as equals. The opening moves of the war already carried a sense of unpredictability, as if destiny itself held its breath, waiting to see whether the Roman Republic or the Carthaginian Empire would prevail in the epic conflict that history would remember as the Second Punic War. As Hannibal established himself in northern Italy, the true scale of the challenge facing Rome began to unfold, not in sudden bursts but through a series of shocks that shattered their confidence step by step. Roman generals initially believed they could block and crush this invader quickly, as they had done with previous enemies on the peninsula, yet every attempt to stop Hannibal only seemed to reveal another layer of his strategic brilliance. His alliance with Gallic tribes strengthened his numbers and provided vital local support, while his reputation as a daring commander inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. Rather than simply charging toward Rome, he moved with calculated intention, selecting battlefields that favored his cavalry, using terrain like a weapon, and anticipating Roman reactions before they even knew their own plans. Early clashes near the Ticinus and Trebia rivers became brutal lessons for Rome, where overconfidence turned into devastating losses and the realization dawned that this war would not be brief or easily controlled. The ordinary Roman citizen felt the impact not through distant reports alone but through the return of wounded soldiers, the mourning of families, and the whispering of rumors that Hannibal seemed impossible to trap or defeat. Meanwhile, at the heart of Carthaginian strategy, there was more than military ambition. There was psychological warfare. Hannibal aimed not merely to beat Roman armies, but to break Roman spirit, to convince Rome's allies that the Republic could no longer protect them, and to unravel the network of loyalty that held Italy together under Roman influence. This is why he did not march directly on Rome at once. Instead, he moved southward, threatening cities, winning victories, and waiting for defections that would weaken Rome from within. His choice to spare some communities and devastate others was not random cruelty. It was deliberate message sending, demonstrating both the cost of resistance and the rewards of cooperation. To many Italians who had long resented Roman control, Hannibal appeared not only as a conqueror but as a chance to overturn old dominance and regain autonomy. Yet Rome responded with its characteristic resilience. The Senate refused to negotiate, refused to surrender, and refused to admit defeat, even when losses mounted. The Republic appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator for a time, and his strategy of delay, avoiding pitched battle, shadowing Hannibal's movements, cutting off supplies where possible, frustrated both the Carthaginians and many impatient Romans. Soldiers used to decisive engagements found themselves in a slow, grinding contest of maneuver and attrition, while citizens debated whether caution was wisdom or cowardice. Fabius earned the nickname Cunctator, the delayer, because he believed the key to victory lay in stretching the war until Carthaginian resources ran thin. Hannibal, however, countered even this by continuing to outthink his opponents, luring them into traps, burning crops, and manipulating expectations. The war had now become more than marching armies. It was a constant mental struggle in which each side attempted to predict and outlast the other. Every movement on the map carried political consequences, shaping alliances and morale, altering the balance between hope and fear. When Hannibal's successes convinced the great southern city of Capua to side with him, the conflict entered yet another stage. Rome recognized that its authority was cracking, that this invader was not merely raiding but rewriting loyalties. Roman pride was deeply wounded, yet so too was Carthage, aware that despite victories, the ultimate prize, the submission of Rome itself, remained elusive. This uncertainty gave the war a deep sense of suspense, as if the Mediterranean world was watching with held breath, unable to predict whether the Republic would crumble or rise stronger from its suffering. What had begun as a dispute over a single city had become an all-embracing struggle that involved entire populations, economies, and futures. Each passing year intensified the stakes, bringing both sides closer to exhaustion yet further from compromise, because neither empire could accept anything less than dominance. The early chapters of the Second Punic War therefore unfolded not only on battlefields but in the emotions of people across Italy and beyond, people living under the shadow of armies, listening for distant thunder, and knowing that the decisions of commanders like Hannibal and Roman leaders would determine the fate of their world. As the war moved into its middle years, the struggle between Rome and Carthage reached a terrifying intensity, and the names of battles like Lake Trasimene and Cannae became etched into history as symbols of both genius and catastrophe. Hannibal's ambush at Lake Trasimene stunned the Roman world when entire legions were caught between mountains and water, swallowed by fog and Carthaginian steel before they could even form proper lines. Panic spread as news arrived that thousands of Roman soldiers had been killed or captured, and that a consular army had simply ceased to exist in a single disastrous encounter. Yet even this was only a prelude to what would follow at Cannae in 216 BCE, one of the most devastating defeats ever suffered by Rome. There, on the dusty plains of Apulia, Hannibal arranged his troops in a seemingly fragile center and stronger wings, inviting the Romans to push forward with their massive infantry blocks. As the Romans pressed in, confident that sheer numbers would crush their opponents, the Carthaginian line bent without breaking, slowly drawing them deeper into a trap. Then Hannibal's cavalry and flanking units closed like a tightening ring, surrounding the dense Roman formation on all sides. What followed was not simply a battle but a slaughter that shocked the ancient world. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers were cut down, some fighting desperately to escape, others crushed in the chaos of their own crowded lines. Consuls, officers, and veterans fell as the encirclement tightened, and the battlefield became a grim lesson in how strategy could overcome numerical superiority. Rome lost an enormous part of its military strength in a single day, along with the confidence that its armies were invincible. Families across Italy mourned fathers, sons, and brothers who never returned, and rumors grew that Rome itself might soon be attacked. Many of Rome's allies wavered, and cities like Capua openly defected to Hannibal, believing the Republic's fall was now only a matter of time. Yet in this darkest moment, the character of Rome revealed itself. Instead of surrendering or negotiating, the Senate forbade public mourning, forbade discussion of peace, and began raising new armies even from boys and older men. It was as if the city transformed grief into iron determination. Fabius Maximus's strategy of caution was revived, and Rome avoided pitched battles while slowly reclaiming control, retaking rebellious cities and punishing betrayal. Meanwhile, Hannibal, despite his brilliant victories, faced a different kind of struggle. He had won battles but not the war, because Rome refused to break and Carthage failed to send him the full reinforcements he needed. His army, far from home for years, gradually wore down, its veterans irreplaceable and its supplies uncertain. Hannibal marched south to threaten more territory, hoping for support from Macedon and other powers, but much of this aid came too late or too weakly to change the balance. The war had become a prolonged test of endurance, measured in burned fields, besieged cities, and exhausted soldiers who had forgotten what peace looked like. Carthaginian victories still inspired fear, but Roman resilience inspired something even stronger: the belief among Roman citizens that survival depended on refusing despair. Suspense hung over every campaign season as people wondered whether Hannibal would finally march on Rome itself or whether another Roman army would meet the same fate as those at Cannae. Yet Hannibal chose not to attack the heavily defended city, understanding that its walls, population, and reserves made such an assault risky and uncertain. Instead, the war settled into a long, grinding stalemate on Italian soil, where neither side could easily deliver a final blow. The cost of this deadlock was measured not only in military statistics but in wasted harvests, ruined towns, empty homes, and generations shaped by fear. All across Italy and beyond, people lived with the feeling that the world they knew was being broken apart and that the outcome of this fierce struggle would decide which culture, Roman or Carthaginian, defined the future of the Western Mediterranean. As years dragged on, the Second Punic War transformed from a series of stunning campaigns into a long struggle that drained both empires, testing not only armies but economies, leadership, and the patience of entire populations. Italy had become a landscape marked by ruined farms, destroyed towns, and displaced families, and the war was no longer confined to its soil alone. Rome understood that defeating Hannibal in Italy would not be enough unless Carthage itself was weakened at its core, and so the conflict widened to Spain, Sicily, and eventually North Africa. In Spain, Roman commanders fought to dismantle the Carthaginian power base built by Hamilcar, Hasdrubal, and Hannibal, not only in battles but in diplomacy with Iberian tribes whose loyalty could tilt the balance. It was in these campaigns that a young and ambitious Roman commander named Publius Cornelius Scipio began to rise, learning from both Roman tradition and Hannibal's own methods. He studied Carthaginian tactics, understood the power of speed, surprise, and morale, and shaped his army to fight not just as a blunt force but with creative strategy. Meanwhile, inside Carthage there was political division, hesitation, and competing priorities that often left Hannibal without the full reinforcements and resources he desperately needed. Carthaginian leaders had to defend multiple fronts and protect their economic interests, especially in Spain, where precious metals and trade routes formed the backbone of their wealth. Every lost city in Iberia represented not only military defeat but financial strain, and Rome knew that weakening Carthage's treasury meant weakening its armies. The war also affected the seas, though Rome's control of naval power limited Carthage's ability to move troops freely, reinforcing the sense that the longer the conflict lasted, the more advantage shifted toward Rome's deeper manpower reserves. In Italy, Hannibal still maneuvered with skill, winning local engagements and maintaining his veteran corps, but his situation was slowly tightening. Many of his finest soldiers had been lost over years of constant campaigning, and replacements were difficult to secure so far from home. Some of the Italian allies who had initially joined him began to worry as Roman recovery grew more visible, and Roman legions gradually retook rebellious territories, besieging strongholds like Capua and eventually regaining control through relentless persistence. Each recaptured city sent a message that Rome might bend but would not break. Scipio's victories in Spain finally cut off one of Hannibal's main sources of support, and his growing reputation convinced the Roman Senate to trust him with an even greater task, taking the war directly to Africa. This decision instantly changed the dynamics of the conflict. For the first time since the beginning of the war, Carthage itself stood under real threat, forcing its leaders to recall Hannibal from Italy, the land where he had fought for so many years and achieved legendary victories. His departure marked the end of a long and dramatic chapter on Italian soil, a land that had witnessed marches, battles, devastation, and unending tension. As Hannibal prepared to face Scipio in Africa, both commanders understood they were approaching a decisive meeting that would echo through history. The people of Carthage felt fear at seeing Roman armies near their homeland, just as Romans had once feared Hannibal's presence in theirs. By now, the war had consumed nearly a generation, with losses counted not only in soldiers but in farmers, merchants, and civilians whose lives had been reshaped by conflict. Fields had gone untilled, trade had been disrupted, and entire communities had been emptied or relocated. Suspense surrounded the coming confrontation, because both sides had experienced victory and disaster, and both possessed leaders of extraordinary talent. Would Hannibal's experience and battlefield brilliance once more overturn Roman plans, or would Scipio's adaptability and growing authority bring the final turning of the tide? Every decision now carried enormous consequences, not just for commanders but for empires whose future direction depended on a single outcome. The war that began with political tension in Spain and an audacious Alpine crossing had now circled back toward the homeland of Carthage, drawing the conflict toward a decisive resolution that would soon determine which power would dominate the Western Mediterranean for centuries to come. The final phase of the Second Punic War unfolded in North Africa, where the fate of both empires would at last be decided, and where years of marching, battles, sacrifice, and determination converged into one decisive confrontation. When Hannibal returned to Africa, he was no longer the young commander who had crossed the Alps with daring confidence. He was now a seasoned veteran, carrying the weight of countless campaigns and the responsibility of defending his homeland from the very enemy he had once threatened at their own door. Scipio, on the other hand, arrived in Africa with rising prestige and a clear plan: force Carthage to fight on its own soil, cut away any hope of prolonged resistance, and end a war that had drained Rome for nearly 2 decades. Before the armies clashed at Zama in 202 to 201 BCE, both leaders tried negotiation, each measuring the other not only as an opponent but as a fellow strategist who understood the terrible cost of continuing the conflict. Yet the terms could not satisfy both sides, and so the decision passed once more from words to weapons. The Battle of Zama became the moment when strategies, courage, and years of accumulated experience were tested to their limits. Hannibal deployed his war elephants and veteran troops, hoping to break Roman lines with shock and momentum, while Scipio organized his legions into flexible formations, leaving lanes through which the elephants could be drawn and neutralized rather than allowed to smash through infantry ranks. As the great beasts thundered forward, Roman trumpets, discipline, and maneuvering scattered them, some trampling their own soldiers, others being guided harmlessly away. The infantry clash that followed was intense and unforgiving, with veterans on both sides recognizing that this fight would determine whether Rome or Carthage would dominate the Western Mediterranean. Roman cavalry under Massinissa struck Hannibal's flanks, and gradually the Carthaginian line began to weaken. Exhaustion, casualties, and years of attrition now spoke louder than tactics. At last, Scipio's forces prevailed, and the Carthaginian army was broken. The human cost of this single battle added to the already enormous toll of the war. Tens of thousands dead across 2 decades, cities destroyed, families displaced, and landscapes scarred by fire and siege. Carthage, once a proud maritime power, was forced to accept harsh peace terms. It lost its overseas possessions, surrendered its fleet, paid a crushing indemnity, and agreed never again to wage war without Roman permission. Rome, in turn, emerged as the unrivaled master of the Western Mediterranean, stronger than ever but deeply marked by the sacrifices it had made. The Second Punic War had shown the world both the resilience of the Roman Republic and the brilliance of Hannibal, who, despite defeat, remained respected even by his enemies as one of history's greatest commanders. Yet victory did not erase suffering. Across Italy, Spain, Africa, and beyond, the echoes of the war lingered in the ruins of farms, in the memory of lost populations, and in the stories told by survivors who had lived through years filled with fear and uncertainty. It was a conflict driven by politics, pride, revenge, ambition, and the determination of 2 powers that could not share dominance. Suspense had followed every campaign, every alliance, every rumor of a new battle, until the final clash closed the long chapter of rivalry between Rome and Carthage. The world had changed forever. Roman hegemony now shaped law, culture, commerce, and expansion for generations to come, while Carthage entered a period of decline from which it would never fully recover. As this story of strategy, courage, tragedy, and endurance draws to its close, we turn to you, the viewer, who has traveled with us through the rise and fall of armies and the decisions of leaders whose choices altered history. If you feel that our videos bring you accurate knowledge, real historical insight, and engaging storytelling about the great battles that shaped the past, then make sure to support our work. If you are gaining true information from our videos, please like our channel, subscribe, and press the bell notification button so that you can watch our latest War Series videos as soon as they are released.